So that being said, I want to help give you guys some of that baseline knowledge so you can be more like person B, you know, if you have some goals or want to get into better shape or whatever it is. And you can take all of this foundational stuff and you can tweak it, like I said, based on your needs and preferences. It is a bit of it's a learning process. So again, just be open to being flexible and really listening to what you need. So the first thing, I know you guys just want like a brief overview of macronutrients. I know there's a lot of information out there nowadays. A lot of us are much savvier about this sort of thing than we used to be. So I don't want to like bore you with super nitty gritty details. But just a quick primer on this. Macronutrients, they're called macronutrients because you need them in large quantities versus micronutrients, which you need in smaller quantities. So your macros are your proteins, your fats, and your carbs. Your micronutrients are your vitamins and your minerals. So I started with protein here just because I think even if, you know, you're not trying to be Mr. Olympia or Miss Olympia or whatever, protein is important for everyone if you want to maintain a healthy body composition and be at a healthy body weight and do it in a way that's sustainable. So I really think that it's the first place to look whenever you start figuring out what your macronutrient needs are. And I just have a good rule of thumb here. Super easy to figure out. The optimal amount of protein for most people is going to be about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. So I've taken an example here. So let's say we have a 150-pound person. I also have this same example person in one of the PDFs that I'm going to send out to you guys, just because it keeps the math simple. So 150-pound person, they need about 150 grams of protein per day. So again, that seems to be about the sweet spot. You can definitely get away with a little bit less, but I would say if to get the best results, to really try to get close to that number. And I think another question that people often have is, you know, if I go too much over that, is there such thing as too much protein? Is there, like, am I going to screw up my kidneys eating a high protein diet? So unless you have some kind of underlying kidney issue or underlying health issue, they've actually done studies where people are eating like 3 times their body weight in grams of protein per day with no ill effects. So for example, a 150-pound person, they'd have them on like 3 times that much protein. So was that 450 grams a day? And again, they didn't have any ill health effects, but it's not optimal. It's not ideal because anything over that 1 gram per pound of body weight a day just doesn't seem to provide any additional benefits. So yeah, I think those are some of the common questions I get. And then protein, of course, you guys know, you know, red meat, poultry, seafood, eggs, dairy. There's also plant source of protein like beans and legumes, soy products, things like that. Those often come with carbohydrates as well versus animal sources, which are usually just protein and fat. And I think a lot of times people wonder if they need to supplement with protein, especially if they're first starting to work out. They're like, okay, do I need to buy some protein powder, do like a protein shake after my workout? And the answer to that is super simple. And that is, if you are able to meet your protein needs through just the food that you're eating, then no, it's not really going to be any additional benefit to add in some kind of supplemented protein powder. Even if, you know, you're working out and being active. So the only time you really need to do that is if you're unable to hit those protein goals with the food that you're eating, which is a common thing for a lot of people, especially if it's more protein than you're used to eating. Then yeah, like getting a protein shake can be very helpful with that. So I think that's it for protein. Again, I'll open it up for questions at the end if I miss anything that you guys are curious about. Then we'll go to fat. And so again, the amount of fat you should have in your diet, this is gonna vary a lot more than protein as far as the optimal amount for you. So the range that I have here, just as kind of your starting baseline, would be about 20 to 35% of your calories coming from fat. And again, in the guide that I'm going to send you guys, it breaks down all of these calculations in a really simple way, so you could crunch all the numbers if you really want to. So the thing is here, you can definitely go higher than 35% of your calories coming from fat based on your preferences, but it's really, I would not advise going below 20% of your calories coming from fat. It is an essential nutrient, which means we have to get it through our diets. Fat does a lot of good things for us. It really helps in hormone production. It helps us to absorb certain nutrients like fat-soluble vitamins. It helps keep our tissues healthy. It helps with cell signaling, and it also helps us feel satisfied and full after we eat it with our meals. So you definitely don't want to go too low on fat. So I would not go under 20% of your calories coming from fat. And then you guys probably know some healthy sources of fat. With all of these macronutrients, you want to go for the whole unprocessed food sources before you go to anything else. So things like nuts and seeds. There's definitely animal sources of fat that can be healthy. The healthier the animal was, the healthier fat profile the food is going to have. So that's why you'll see, pasture raised and grass fed and things like that. A lot of times the fat profiles in that food, whether it's milk or butter or it's a fattier cut of meat, it is going to be healthier than that of a conventionally raised animal, relatively speaking. So I think that's all I had to say about fat. Last but not least, carbohydrates. I know this is a hot topic right now. The keto diet is in vogue. Carbohydrates. So again, are carbohydrates bad for you? Are they going to make you fat? What about insulin? All that good stuff. The simple answer is no, not if you're eating the right kinds of carbohydrates. So again, we're going for whole food sources. We're going for things like, starchy vegetables like potatoes and yams and winter squash and things like whole grains and rice and even whole grain pasta and whole grain bread. Is that stuff bad for you? No. Are carbs bad for you? No. Super high processed carbs, things like corn syrup, things that give you a huge spike in insulin and have no nutritional value to go along with it. They don't have any fiber, things like that. Those are the bad carbs. So how you figure out how many carbs you should have, typically a good rule of thumb is once you've figured out your protein and your fat needs, you then take the remainder of whatever calories and have them come from carbohydrates. And again, that's just a starting point. So most people, it's good to really stick with that standard gram of protein per pound of body weight per day, and then really do your tweaking when it comes to the carbs and the fat. Honestly, a lot of that is just based on your preferences. And also, it's going to depend on how active you are. So what the vast majority of people find is that the more active they are, especially if they're doing a lot of weight training or a lot of, high intensity training, they'll find that they do need more carbohydrates in order to fuel that activity. So they're not kind of like hitting a wall in the middle of it. And also, carbohydrates, they are stimulating your body to release insulin, and insulin isn't, bad in and of itself. Insulin is actually a very anabolic hormone. So as long as you're eating healthy carbohydrates and not in like some crazy excess where you're also getting an excess amount of calories that you don't need, as long as you're getting them from the right sources and you're living an active lifestyle, they can actually help you build muscle. So insulin, it's pulling that sugar, so those carbohydrates from your bloodstream into your cells, and that includes your muscle cells. And with it, it's also bringing other nutrients. So say if you just had a really hard workout and then you eat a meal that's rich in protein and carbohydrates, that insulin spike is also going to allow those amino acids from the protein source to get into your muscles a lot faster. And so that's what I mean when I'm saying like it's an anabolic hormone, so it helps build up tissue. So it can be very helpful, but you really don't need to get into that much detail about it. I just kind of want to illustrate that it's not like this evil thing that I think a lot of people that are, championing all these really low carb diets, it's not as evil as some of those people tend to make it out to be. And another thing about low carb diets, I'm not poo-pooing them either. There are some people that feel like they do really well on low carb diets and they really enjoy eating that way. And in fact, that there's a few people I know that go to our gym that do a keto diet, and that's what they find works for them. They enjoy eating that way. It doesn't feel restrictive to them to eat in that fashion, and that's how they found success. So I wouldn't try to change their mind about that if they found that that's something that works for them. But I will say, for most people, that's probably not going to be the case, because you are having to cut out whole food groups in order to meet those really low levels of carbs you have to stay under each day. And for a lot of people, it is going to zap their energy, especially if they're trying to do something like CrossFit, something that's high intensity. Another thing with low carb diets, if you do them for a long period of time, for a lot of people, it can cause different hormonal changes. So again, it's not necessarily permanent, but they're unhelpful nonetheless. So for a lot of people, if they're eating super low carb and they're also being active, a lot of times their cortisol levels will go up, so their stress hormones will go up, their testosterone will go down. So even if you're a woman, you need a certain amount of testosterone. And so both of those combine to kind of make you feel sluggish and can start to eat away at any healthy muscle tissue that you do have. And a lot of people also just feel like their mood isn't very good when they're trying to go super low carb, and they just feel irritable, and it can be very hard to sustain over the long term, because life happens, and there are days where we can't stay under 30 grams of carbs or whatever they prescribe. So again, I just wanted to illustrate that you shouldn't take like a one-size-fits-all approach to any of this stuff. These numbers that I'm giving you guys are just starting points. And I think the last thing I'll say about macros here is that, so this is actually pretty cool. They've done studies where they've taken two groups of people and they put them on diets. So both diets had the same amount of calories, and both diets had the same amount of protein. So they kept those things stable. And the one group, they put them on a high carb, low fat diet. The other group was on a high fat, low carb diet. And they kind of compared to see how it worked as far as weight loss efforts went. And over the course of a few weeks, what they found is they both lost pretty much the same amount of weight. The low carb group lost a teeny bit more weight, but they attributed a lot of that to the fact that they lost a lot of water weight. And that's because when carbohydrates are stored in our body and stored in our muscle tissue, they're also holding on to a certain amount of water along with the molecules of the glycogen. So whenever you completely deplete your glycogen stores, so like those carbohydrate stores that are in your cells, just by not eating very many carbs at all and going about your daily life, or especially if you're working out a lot, you'll lose a lot of water along with that. And that effect is, of course, temporary. So that's a lot of the weight loss that people will see in the first week or two of starting a diet like keto. And so in the study, they found that the group that was eating a high carbohydrate, low fat diet, again, they lost almost the same amount of weight, but a higher percentage of their weight loss came from fat loss versus the other group. They lost a lot more water, and they also lost a little bit more muscle tissue in the process. So that's something I just wanted to illustrate. I know keto is a big hot topic going around right now. If you found that it works for you, or you know someone it works for them, that's cool. But it certainly doesn't need to be something that we all need to subscribe to.